Hi everyone, I'm going to show you how to add Apple authentication to your Expo React Native iOS app today. So I'm going to import useState because I'm going to hold whether the authentication is available or not. It's only available for iOS. For Android it just won't be available. So you might want to, well, you probably won't show anything. The reason you might need to add Apple authentication to your app is if you've got other third-party authentication methods. So like if you allow sign in with Google or something like that, then you also need to provide Apple authentication, or the App Store may not approve your app. So basically I'm going to import star as Apple authentication from expo-apple-authentication, and I'm now setting up my state variable, which is Apple Auth available, and I've got a function there that will set whether Apple authentication is available or not, and it's going to default to false. So now inside my view, I'm going to go ahead and check whether Apple Auth is available, and if it is, I'm just going to show authentication content, which will be some buttons, so like the login button, for example, or log out, or refresh token, stuff like that. So I'm going to create a separate function to sort of hold that logic, just to keep it quite simple inside that view there. So this function's called get Apple Auth content, and I'll call it when Apple Auth is available. If Apple Auth isn't available, I'm just going to show some text that says that it's not available. So you can see that it's saying Apple Auth is unavailable, and that's just because I've set my default to be false. When I go ahead and actually check using the method available from Apple authentication and set that state variable, then you should be able to see that it is actually available. So now I'm going to go ahead and check whether Apple authentication is available, and I'm going to do that in useEffect. And basically what's going to happen is useEffect's going to be called once because I've set the dependency list to be empty, and it's just going to be called when the application sort of loads up. And I've got a function here called check available, and it's going to be asynchronous because checking whether it's available or not is an asynchronous action. So I've got this variable, I've got this constant is available, and I'm just going to wait Apple authentication is available async, and that's going to return whether it's available. If it's Android, it'll be unavailable. If it's iOS, it'll be probably available. The iOS version does matter as well, so I think it's iOS 14 is when you can use Apple authentication from. So if it's prior to that, then it'll be unavailable. And then I call my check available function. So now that I've got my check for whether it's available, you can see there's nothing on screen because it's calling that get Apple Auth content function. So I'm going to want to go ahead and return the button to allow the user to log in. There's a couple of properties that you're going to want to set against that. One of those is the button type, so that allows you to specify whether that's for signing in or something like that. You just use this button type option, and then it'll give you a few options. So I'm going to just use that sign in option. So I just want the user to be able to sign in. And I'm going to specify the button style as well. So I'm going to go Apple authentication button style.black because I just want the nice simple black style. I'm going to set a corner radius just to make it look a little bit nicer. And I'm also going to want to set a style. The reason I set a style is that if you don't specify a width and a height for this button, then it's actually not going to show on screen. So there's no default there apparently, and so it will just not show. So I'm just going to specify a width of 200 and a height of 64. I've found others have been doing that, and it seems like a good height and width. It looks quite nice. And on press, that's where you're going to want to go ahead and do your login. So I'm going to create a function for that login. So now I'm creating my login function, and that's going to be asynchronous because logging in is an asynchronous function. It can take a long time, and that's why. For example, if the user takes their time to actually sign in, then it will take that amount of time. I'm also going to catch any exceptions, so I can just console log them, but you could handle them however you want to. I'm just console logging them so I can see them. So I'm going to make a call to apple-authentication.signinasync, and that's going to return my credential, which is like a JWT token, and it's going to have things like the identity token. It'll also have the first name, last name, and email the first time I request it, because I'm requesting the full name and email scopes. But for some reason on subsequent requests, it doesn't actually have that data. So if you're needing that data, you're going to need to cache it somewhere or save it somewhere. So like in secure store or async storage. I think the user can also choose not to grant you access to certain things. So if they do that, then you're not going to have that data. So I'm going to go ahead and log that just so we can see what it gets back. I'm going to sign in with Apple, and I have previously signed in with Apple using the Expo Go app, which I'm showing you at the moment. So this is inside the Expo Go app, but I will show you a standalone app and a TestFlight app later on. So because I've signed in before, the name and email is showing as null, but if you do need that email, it's actually inside that identity token as well. And that user is kind of... so you can see that there's a lot of nulls, and you should be able to handle that just in case the user doesn't give you access to that. That user field there, that's the unique identifier for the user. So you could use that inside whatever database you have to sort of say, okay, this is what the Apple user should be. So I'm going to want another state variable, which is going to hold my user token, because if the user is already signed in, I want to show some different buttons like refresh, get the token state. I want to be able to log the user out, all that sort of thing. So inside here, if the user token is not undefined or null, then it's going to go ahead and show that button. If there's no user token, it's going to go ahead and show that button. And if there is a user token, then it's going to go ahead and show the extra buttons that I want to show. I'm also going to decode that identity token just so I can sort of see what's in it. And I'm using a library called JWT Decode. I'm going to link that in the description so you can check that out if you want to. It just makes it really easy to decode the JWT token. So I've got my decoded token now, and I want to also get the current sort of date. And the reason I want to get that is I want to be able to check whether the expiry date from the decoded identity token is whether it's been expired or not. If it's expired, then you probably want to prompt the user to refresh their token. So you would call that refresh method, but I'm just going to show a button for it. You can get them to refresh it other times if you want to, but it's probably only necessary when it's expired. You don't want to be using an expired token just because you'll probably want to verify on your side that it's a valid token, and that would be on your backend, whatever sort of backend you have. So I'm also going to show whether it's expired or not. So basically that will just be whether the current is greater than the expiry date on the token. So now I'm going to go ahead and sign in with Apple just so I can show you that information from the decoded identity token. And you can see it shows my email address and it shows that expired is false. I think they have an expiry time of about a day, so I'm not going to show you when it actually has expired, but you'll just have to take my word for it that there is an expiry time. You can see it if you decode your own token and in the terminal when I show you my decoded token in a bit. I'm also going to add a button to get credential state. So get credential state basically tells you whether the user exists and whether they're sort of valid. So I'm just going to go ahead and write a function called get credential state that will show you how to do that. Once again, this is asynchronous because it could be long running. It typically isn't that long running, but I guess because it can be a little bit of an API call, they don't want you tying up the UI for this sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a constant called credential state and await Apple authentication .get credential state async. Then you need to pass the user, so you can get that from the user token. And so that's part of the reason why I wanted to also set that user token as a state variable, so I can just access it here quite easily. And then I'm just going to console log it because I don't need to do anything with it. So I got back a value of 1. And I'm going to just show you what would happen if I provided a different non-real user. So I've provided 123. And I get back a state of 2. So you can see that 1 means authorized and 2 means not found. So you can sort of see that there's like different credential states. And if you go to this website here, it will just explain them. You can find a bit about it on the Apple Authentication Expo documentation. I'm going to link that in the description below. So I'm going to change that back to that user token.user because I do actually want it to be calling correctly when you guys see it inside GitHub. So yeah, this code is going to be available on GitHub. I'm going to want to save to a secure store, and that's just because I don't want the user to have to sign in every time they open the application. If maybe they leave it for like half an hour and then come back to it, I want to be able to sort of load up their credential. So if it's available, I'm going to try and load from the secure store. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go get item async and I'm going to pass the key that I'm going to save the credential under. I'm using the key apple-credentials. That's going to give me back the JSON that I've saved, and then I can go ahead and set the user token, but I'm going to want to do a JSON.pass on that JSON just so I can get it back into a JavaScript object. And that means I'll be able to access the fields that I want to. Now when I sign in, I'm actually going to want to save to that secure store, and that means that when I reload the application, I'll be able to access that user token even if the user hasn't logged on in this current session of the app. I'm going to save it under that Apple credentials key just so it's accessed through that get inside the useEffect function. And I'm going to pass what I want to actually save there. So now I'm going to go ahead and sign in with Apple, and I'm just going to continue with my password. If you've got an actual device, it may ask you for Face ID or Touch ID, but just because I'm on the emulator the simulator that it's giving me this. So actually I've realized now that I'm saving my token incorrectly into my secure store. So what I've done is I've tried to save my actual object, but I want to change it into a string. So I'm going to go json.stringify, and it's going to save it as a string so I can get it back out and pass it back into a JavaScript object. So now I'm going to log in again, and this time it should work successfully, and save the token against that Apple credentials. And you can see that it's not giving me any errors this time, and if I reload, it still knows that this token exists, and it's just taking me straight to that screen for having a user token. So now I want to be able to log out, because we don't want someone to be logged in forever. They need to be able to log out if they want to. And I'm going to create a new function that will allow me to log out. And this will also be asynchronous, as it could be a long-running function. And I'm just going to go over to the documentation to show you the logout. So it's called sign out async, and it actually says that it's not recommended to use this method to sign out the user, and instead to just simply clear the user's data collected from the sign in async or refresh async, which basically means we want to delete that Apple credentials key from our secure store. So we're going to use this delete item async on the Apple credentials key. And we can set that user token to undefined so that it's cleared in this current state, and will allow us to log in again if the user wants to. So now I've got that logout button. You can see when I click it, it takes me back to the sign in page, and if I reload the app, you can see it hasn't saved, doesn't have that token saved, because it shows me that login page, sign in button again. So it knows that there's no token available and it's been cleared correctly. I'm also going to want to show you how to call the refresh for Apple tokens. So it's pretty similar to the signing in, because you still have to enter your password or Face ID or Touch ID. So it's actually not much different. But I'm going to create a function for it called refresh, and once again it's asynchronous because it could be long running. What I'm going to do is I'll basically just get the result, which is the credential, back, and I'll go await Apple authentication, and then I'll go .refresh async. And basically that's just going to refresh that token, and I can provide some options. So what I want to, well, not an option, I need to provide that user so that it knows who to refresh the token for. Once again, like, you actually have to specify your login details, and that's a security measure that Apple enforces. And yeah, I'm going to set that user token if the user refreshes, as I'll need to be able to access that credential, and I also need to set that Apple credentials item in the secure store as I'm going to use it to verify my API requests if I were to make an API request to my backend. Like, obviously you're logging in using a provider so that you can identify a user, and so you'd likely have some sort of backend that you want them to be able to authenticate with, and that's why you're getting them to log in. Otherwise there's not a lot of point in getting them to log in. So yeah, I'm going to click refresh, and you can see it still prompts me to use my password. You can see the identity token changed. You can see it is actually a different value, and it actually has refreshed it. And so the part that would have changed would be the expiry date, for example. Just realized I wasn't console logging my decoded identity token. I think it'd be useful for you guys to see. So I'm going to go ahead and console log that so you can see what is actually inside that. So you can see that's got a few different things. There's an AUD, which is basically the bundle identifier. We've got the email, which is the email of the user, whether that email is verified. We've got the issuer, which is Apple, so that's useful to check when you are actually verifying from your backend that it actually is from the correct person and that it's not just some random token that's being sent through to you. You can verify it using this Auth key, and I'm going to link this documentation in the description. You can use some package like if you've got a Node backend, you might use node-jsonwebtoken package, and there's a verify option where you can pass a few different things like the audience, which would be your bundle identifier, the issuer, the expiry date, and you can just verify that ignore expiration, you can verify that it is actually a valid token. You can also pass that public key that Apple provides you to make sure that you're actually taking a valid token and that you're not just authenticating with some random made-up token by someone. It helps you make sure that you're actually getting the user who you think you're getting. That probably didn't make a lot of sense. I don't think I worded that very well, but oh well. So yeah, I'm going to show you on the with a standalone application, because I do want to show you that changes the AUD, which is the audience, so that will change the bundle identifier. So I'm going to go ahead and install that Expo Dev client. So the Expo Dev client basically makes it really easy to have a standalone app. You go ahead and then you do your build configuration after this is installed. So I'll go EAS build and then configure. And you can specify that you want to automatically create an EAS project. And then you can specify what platforms you want to configure it for. I'm just going to do Apple because that's all I'm showing you today. And I'll give you this JSON file that sort of defines your different build profiles. So you've got your development profile. And for iOS, I want to specify I'll be using the simulator. So I'm setting simulator to true. Then you've got production options if there are any that you need. I'm going to specify that this plugin here, expo-apple-authentication, is that's required when you're doing your standalone application. And also specifying this config uses non-exempt encryption to be false because I'm using that secure store. And that's, if you look at the documentation, you do need to specify that, and it's to help with some of the questionnaires that come through when you're submitting an iOS app. Then I'm specifying my bundle identifier because that's what's going to be showing in my AUD section of the identity token once I decode it. So I've called that expo-apple-auth. So then I'm running this command here, EAS build for platform iOS, and I want to specify the profile as development. Basically what that's going to do is going to create a development build which I can drag and drop onto my iOS simulator and show you the Apple authentication working. So it gives you this link here, and if you copy and paste that into the browser, then basically it will take you to the build, and once that's done you can go ahead and download it. So you can see that's building currently. I'm just going to skip ahead of that and download it. Often takes about 20 minutes or 15 minutes to build, so I just cut that part out. So you'll get this tar file, and once you expand it, you'll get this Apple authentication application. And if I just drag that onto the simulator, then it'll go ahead and install it. So if I want to go ahead and run my Apple Auth tutorial application, I need to run expo start -- dev client, and that will allow me to open inside that dev client. I specified that I want to open on iOS, and it prompts me to open that app that I've just installed. And this is a standalone app obviously, and if I sign in, then I should be able to specify that I want to share my email and my name, and then I can just continue with password. You can see that kind of completed but never actually went back to the screen, and so I did actually notice an issue. So I'm just testing. I decided I wanted to test in TestFlight as well, just to make sure. So you need the Transporter app to submit to Auth, or you can actually use the command line. I just like to use the Transporter app because I already just generated it that way. It's up to you, personal preference. I've got a tutorial on building and submitting iOS apps if you want to look. But basically I've submitted using Transporter my IPA file, and I'm going to just specify the content rights and age rating, as I think I might need to do this for the testers to be able to test. I've got pretty much nothing in my application, so I can easily tick none to this. It's just my test application to show you guys. I'm going to create a test flight so I can just test that my application is actually, my authentication is actually working. There's not any extra things I need to configure. So if I go to TestFlight, I'm just going to set up an internal testing group, and I'm just going to add myself to that so I can go ahead and test it. And there are no builds available at present, so I'm guessing it must still be processing onto the App Store. If I go back there, you can sort of see that it is processing. And later on it becomes ready to submit, and it says it's sent out an invite. So if I go over to TestFlight on my phone, I can go ahead and install that Apple Auth tutorial application. So I can open that and I can sign in with Apple, and let's hope that this works. This should actually use my Face ID, and you can see that it does use my Face ID as this is a real device, and it's given me my email back. But I couldn't see the output, and I actually just wanted to show you that it actually works. So I've gone back to my standalone app, and for some reason, once I had created my live application, it was allowing me to log in again, and you can see that the AUD is what I expected, and my bundle identifier, the issue is still Apple ID, and it's got the expiry date. So I think that what happened there was probably that maybe the app needed to be created on the Apple Store before the standalone app would work, or maybe the Apple authentication services were temporarily down while I was testing my standalone app. But you could see that it did come back to working once I'd submitted my TestFlight application. So maybe you need to create the app on the App Store before that. I'm not 100% sure what's going on there, but if it's not working for you, give it a try. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial today. If you have, please like and subscribe for more tutorials, and I'll see you guys again soon.